Hello, and welcome to this episode of Rule of Carnage.
Hello.
This is a series of conversations, discussions, chats between myself, Glenn Ford, a games designer and developer, and this guy, Mike Hutchinson, also a games designer and developer. This is a place, this is a channel, this is whatever you want to call it, a podcast where we talk about designing better miniatures games. We talk about it to such a degree that at this point, upwards of 2,000 people have decided to subscribe to the channel.
Hello,
Thank you very
everyone.
much, everybody. Thank you for subscribing. Which, given the incredibly sort of niche nature of our odd little sort of geeky concerns, is genuinely delightful and shocking and splendid. And as
It's
a little bit
particularly splendid to pass this milestone when uh, we got the offer for the textbook for this channel when we had about 300 subscribers. So obviously, like a reputable academic publisher was like, 300 subscribers. Well done, lads.
yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, there were 300 subscribers. That's beyond any of our wildest dreams. Yeah, so we thought as a little acknowledgement of the fact that we've hit another thousand sort of milestone. We'd asked the splendid Discord channel that is attached to Rule of Carnage some questions I'd like to see us answer. And so we're going to sit here and answer some of those questions, some of which are like really good, some of which I think we'll end up answering here and then spinning out into a full episode. Because there are a bunch of very insightful and intelligent people in our Discord that have asked very wise questions. I don't know that we'll get through this in like a single video, so this might be a little mini series of answering these because we've got a few really good and insightful questions here. So
Yeah, in some cases the questions are so good that I don't think I've given them enough thought yet, and I will probably end up giving a glib and slightly unsatisfying answer until a better one is ruminated upon.
I mean, there's some of them I'm absolutely certain I'm going to give a glib and unsatisfying answer to, but yeah, that we'll sort of come back to. So we'll sort of try and give short soundbitey answers to each of these, ruminate on a few of them, maybe for like 5-10 minutes, and then the really chunky ones we'll come back to in the future. I haven't recorded the various names of where these questions came from, just because there were sort of so many of them. So thank you if you contributed one of these questions. You know who you are, and we'll launch on with some of them. So first one that I've got on the list is what's the one popular mechanic you will personally never make a game featuring? Now my thing about it, I mean, first of all, it's sort of an never say never. Anytime I say sort of, well, I'm not interested in this sort of mechanic or this sort of element, I end up sort of having an idea to make it interesting to me, and put it into a game.
Well,
So
yeah,
like,
because it sort of becomes a challenge.
well, it's also you start thinking. I start thinking like, well, why don't I find that mechanic interesting? Well, it's because of this thing about it. And so, well, can I sort of twist and invert and manipulate that thing? And as soon as you start tinkering it and seeing what that bit does, it sort of transforms into something that is interesting to you, and you end up trying to sort of crowbar into a game. I'd say on a very sort of basic, and I know that this isn't necessarily super relevant to miniatures games, sort of mechanical level, worker placement. I can't. It makes my soul shrivel trying to make a worker placement game, which is ironic because like underneath all of the like layers and whatnot, SSO is kind of a worker placement game, but it's kind of secretly a worker placement game. Um, but like a full Euro, I'm not good at doing Euros. I keep trying to do it because I know that they, are profitable. But a Euro worker placement is the sort of thing I'd be unlikely to do. In minis
Could
games,
you could you make could you make one work for a minis game as a sort of command system or a resource assignment system?
oh, like a sort of little mini. I
Like
mean,
a command mini game or a mech power system mini game.
I think I could. I think I would be inherently personally unlikely to, because the sorts of things that interest me are things about like communication and bluffing and hidden information and all those sorts of things. So if I was like, oh, how do I get like a command like mini game into the game? I'm like, well, I absolutely am going to be doing it with like little hidden messages passed around and those sorts of notation things, just because it's like, well, that would work and it would definitely instantly engage me.
Mm.
On a more general sense, I think like, and this is a bit of a cop out because it's such a sort of like big thing, but powerful 360-degree line of sight shooting is almost certainly never going to be in a game that I design, just because I don't have a strong desire to horribly torture myself
Yeah.
with something that's willfully difficult to make interesting and fun. Is
Hmm.
there anything that sort of jumps out for you, Mike? And like I said, it's
Well,
just
so the problem, so the glib answer is morale systems. I just don't ever seem to put human psychology in any of my
you
games.
you barely put like individuals or like named people don't tend to turn up in your games.
Yeah, but I think the real answer, because I used to think the answer was true line of sight, but I don't think that's true anymore. I think the answer probably, and maybe I'll find a place where this makes sense, but I'm very, I don't like the taste of it, and it's not to my taste, is unreliable slash random activations, like activations where you test to see if you get to have a turn.
I I think the one that always, whenever I sort of see it, makes me very nervous is like testing to see if you'll be allowed to move.
Yeah.
Like, it's one like unreliable activations. If you get payback for it, is sometimes like not too. But as soon as a game starts sort of saying you might not be able to move your miniature, I'm always like, oh no, 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 you're very much
Yeah, and so
taking
like I know there's a whole school of these things, but like my first like proper interaction with this was War Master, and that's like Priestley sort of having another crack at Warhammer, but with a bit more of a zoomed out and kind of slightly more historical and ancients vibe. And he did go on to convert it into ancients, but like that for me is the sort of poster boy of a mechanic that I just don't particularly enjoy interacting with.
yeah,
I
because
would
that
ra- I would rather the uncertainty be a bit more kind of at the input level before I've made the decisions about where to kind of commit my command focus, or have it so that the actual kind of activation system as a whole, I suppose that's sort of saying the same thing, but yeah, like I want to know before I make the decision rather than testing, as you say, kind of testing movement or testing activation as if it's a kind of output randomized shooting or melee attack. It just
yeah,
doesn't work for me.
no, I know what you mean. It's a tricky thing because obviously the sort of the chaos and fog of war of, okay, your guys aren't going to do what you want them to all of the time. It feels very classic and old school to go like, sometimes you tell a unit to do something or want to tell a unit to do something and it just is like, nah, not going to happen. But my personal taste is, I want at the end of one round, or whatever it happens to be, the unit to go, we're putting on our like grumpy pants. We've like panicked or broken or done whatever it is because of the things that happened, and then we end the round, and then we go to the next set of activations, and you already know that we're in a bit of a huff. So do you know what I mean? Rather than going like, okay, don't anybody tell me how you feel about what's going on. At this moment, I think we're all on the same team, and now I'm gonna like decide what I want you to do, and then one of you just goes, no. Turns out all along, I was deeply. I don't like the idea of my army being passive aggressive. I think maybe it just like the
Yeah,
whole.
but I think therein like quite a lot of story can come out of that. But
Hmm.
yeah, I haven't found the way to implement it in a way that is delightful for my own designs. All right,
Okay.
next.
Next up is one of our Discord members is talking about putting together a sort of a challenge, a game jam based around the War Game Atlantic box sets, where everybody sort of picks a box set and designs a game around it. And the question is, what would be the box set that we would pick? And we'll probably come back to this one to like do like little game dev diaries about whatever we end up doing. I've been trying to avoid thinking about mine because this is meant to be a to my mind, it's going to be a thing that's going to have like an official date and an end date. And I want to wait until like everybody else starts on theirs. But then I had a really good idea for mechanic the other day. Um, so the set I would be going for would be the World War I Field Hospital set from Wargame Atlantic. Uh, for a bunch of reasons, but it's like I keep talking about wanting to do more non-violent game stuff. And so it would be, I mean, I had a long I had a long short list because there's some really nice narrative-y feeling boxes in there. But that one just felt like I really fancy doing a thing about werewolves, but it's like if I keep saying there should be more non-violent stuff, and I don't take the opportunity to do a thing with doctors and nurses and shell shock patients, I'm really sort of starting to feel like I should put my money where my mouth is. So that's the thing that I would pick. If you had a look and had a little thought,
Yeah. So shout out to Malev of
yeah.
Demonship and Pit Lord fame for coming up with this challenge. I so it's Olympics season, and so I have been looking at the box entitled Skeleton Cavalry and Chariots, which hides a deeper secret, which is that it also contains some foot skeletons as well. So you get undead in mounted vehicle and infantry formats. So I would probably try and create an entire ancient Olympics sort of California Games type mini games sort of situation where, having assembled half of that box each, you do like, sort of skeleton polo and then skeleton sprinting, or like chariot racing, or some kind of yeah. Anyway, so
I mean, it's
yeah,
it's it's, it's funny because you're sort of thinking about that having recently done space skits, and I always think of those those old Olympic mini games. They're always the sort of
the stick
dexterity,
wagglers.
yeah, the kind of the finger speed thing. And I'm definitely like, okay, well, here's your skeleton, and the shot put is flick his head off and try to get it down the table.
So a really dumb mechanic that I put in Space Kits. I haven't quite figured out how to word it, but when I was testing it with our mate John, he interpreted the rule differently to what I was. So the way that initiative works in Space Kits is at the beginning of the game, the player who can toss and catch the most dice in one hand is the first player without dropping any. And so I was imagining throwing them up and catching them with a single thing, and he went from one hand to another. But like, therein lies the California Games of sort of dice plus miniatures. Yeah, so that's what I'm going to go.
Okay, fantastic. Um, so the next question is your first unpublished complete game. What was it, and what drove you to start it? Um, so the first thing I guess the first thing I would say would be like a fully completed game that I
Yeah,
never
define completed here. This is really tricky.
yeah. Well, the first sort of fully completed what would be a genuine like working standalone game that I never intended to publish,
Mm,
which is it's like because unpublished is like all right, might go there somewhere. There's a game I did call for myself called Cards Without Humanity,
mm,
which is a game. It's just a genuinely very horrible like game about asking you to like make very very unpleasantly difficult sort of theoretical moral choices, and the game sort of says at the start, okay, it doesn't matter, none of this matters, it's clearly a card game, but the amount of weight you're putting on these non-important choices, is presumably relative to what you're going to win or lose, the same that you would put onto the choices in real life when you had a lot to win or lose. So if you do make an awful decision here, you are genuinely an awful person. It's just a matter of scale. So I just did that as a sort of a little piece of self-amusing myself. I think one like minis game that I think is unlikely to ever go anywhere um, is when Mike first did Hobgoblin, and I've mentioned this sort of before on the channel.
oh yeah.
Mike first did Hobgoblin. I was like, okay, well, this is going to be like my rank and flank game, um, which is sort of around the time that Warhammer was being put out to pasture. I sort of thought, well, what would be so that I can get out all of my desires for crunchy at the tabletop making decisions-y sort of stuff. I sat down and wrote what would be my rank and flank miniatures game, and then just put it in a folder and shoved it in a drawer, and have barely looked at it since. And so I did that literally to just get out a certain amount of shouting at Mike, and for my own sort of amusement, and then wrote it. And it's a sort of fully realized rank and flank game, but I don't think I'm going to ever do anything with it because that wasn't what it was for. Have you got something that is?
Well, so I've shown this on the channel before. This is Mike's very old games. This is a folder of things from when I was a teenager, which includes like see, this is it, like things that are completed. I don't know, but like this thing here was called REM, and it was like a sort of role-playing game about beings of emotional, entirely composed of emotional energy. This is just a White Wolf like rip-off with its own little like map. There was a superhero game called POW, which I never finished. But the first thing that I properly finished, which I've talked about before, because it sort of relates to A Billion Suns, is this thing here called Space Fleet. And Space Fleet has its own little small rulebook here. And then it has absolutely dozens and dozens of these ship cards, which were like Man of War mixed with an old board game called War Master that was released in these are some in White Dwarf. These are some ships that my friends made.
Yeah, I think I've
Yeah,
got.
so this thing, I've never played it since I was a kid. I'm quite intrigued to go back, but there's a page missing from the rule book here, so I don't actually know how one crucial part of this game was intended to work. But it has extended boarding actions where like little tokens end up, like if you crash into someone, you can put little tokens onto their ship locations and then have a sort of pointlessly elongated mini game of invading on their ships. So yeah, that was the first thing. What was the second half of the question?
Um, oh, what drove you to start it?
What drove me to start it? I don't think Battlefleet Gothic. No, Battlefleet Gothic definitely hadn't come out yet because this was sort of 97. Um, but we knew about Space Fleet and had some cool ships, and knew about Man of War and had played it a couple of times. And I really wanted a spaceship game, so I made up a spaceship game. Um, yeah, as with all of the games that I write, it's just because I really want to play them.
Yeah, I think I'm as a youth, I tended to sort of write extra units and extra rules and extra things. It never occurred to me to sort of try and write an entire game of my own.
I don't. Yeah, no, I have no idea where that like. Um, I want to. Confidence isn't the word I'm looking for. That hubris came from.
Well, I think what I always wanted to do, and what and I've spoken about before as a sort of a good training ground, is I always wanted to write write a unit or a rule or something that my friends would want to play in a
Hmm.
game, because you always write a rule and you come in and you realize that it's horribly beneficial to you in some way, shape, or form, or it's too overcomplicated and other people can't grasp it. And like the first time I wrote a set of army lists for a campaign which people had the choice to use or not,
Hmm.
and they chose to write an army to that army list, was like, okay, well, this is how these things are meant to work.
Very nice.
Um, okay, the next question is, and this is one that is definitely a full episode, and you know this is what I'm definitely going to have to give a glib answer to, is how do you make hidden movement work? Because yeah, my short and glib answer is fucked if I know. Um, in a
Do Scotland Yard.
Well, I mean, this is the thing. So in a non-discrete game specifically, like, okay, I mean, have two massive transparent like plastic sheets
Yeah.
with like a slight gap between them, and slide in a big opaque sheet between them, and then draw your units physically onto these sheets, and then pull the black sheet out of the way, and then like have them interact, and then put the black sheet back again, and then rub units off, and then draw them in again where they're going to be for when they're moving. That's how you could do a full hidden movement.
Yeah,
You
or
know,
you could write a miniatures game intended natively for Tabletop Simulator.
yeah, potentially you could do it. You could certainly do it digitally. That would be
Yeah, yeah,
frankly,
there's
that'd be
no
the easiest
question
thing in
there.
the world. Just have
Um, so the correct answer to this question is smoke a pipe and have 36 matchboxes just lying around your house because it's like 1960 and you do, and then build one of those things that they had in Featherstone and Bath's campaigns where there are 36 matchboxes, and when you move into a zone, you get to open the matchbox from your side and find out if there's a little slip of paper with a unit concealed in it.
well, again, I mean, it's a lovely system. I every time I read it, and we'll get onto it because the late question sort of relates to this. There's some great stuff in Featherstone, but that is a discrete game.
Yeah, that's true.
That is and
Or a
fundamentally,
discrete campaign system on top of a non-discrete game.
yeah.
Well, look, I mean, you will discover the answer to this question when Pacific Command comes out, because I decided that I wanted to build on Rick Priestley's ideas in All Quiet on the Martian Front, where and I'm sure he's not the first, and this is not the first game to have it, but he had a system of tokens where you would deploy the blips down. I mean, it's now I say it out loud, it's Space Hulk as well, right?
Hmm.
But the intention being that there is some counters, and one of them is the unit, and some of them are not the units, but only one of the players knows that. And so I extended that idea and got more and more fanciful with it, and then turned those into upside down poker chips in stacks of poker chips, where sometimes you will find the unit and sometimes you won't. And so, yeah, so
Yeah.
my answer is I don't know, sweat for 2 years and write a game that needs a whole set of poker chips.
Well, the thing is, and you can do it, and again, that you can do it for known unknowns because that is that system is sort of having known unknowns. Doing it for unknown unknowns, that's the real sort of like. I think that's one way to just the component weight would just get so heavy that it's like there are better ways of doing this. And there,
Yeah, and I wonder if that's fun, because I don't even know what what an unknown unknown thing would look like, because like even in war you have some intelligence about something, some information about the enemy's strength, or some indications of their probable position or heading.
yeah, I mean, again, this is sort of this. I think could be a full conversation, but I think there's legit
Yes.
like skirmish game explanations. It's like, okay, well, this is a horror game, and the thing you're fighting is like a ghost or whatever,
Yep.
and you genuinely never know where he's going to be. It's like there's plenty of fantasy reasons
Yeah,
for
and like Perilous Tales at its heart is an attempt to have hidden movement, but like all of the hidden movement is on the AI side. And so
yeah.
and it's
That's
funny because I've tried. So quick one on Perilous Tales. This is just an observation. So Perilous Tales, you deploy a grid of token. You deploy some tokens on a grid, and those tokens have got numbers on the other side, and they move towards you. And when you get too close, you turn the tokens over and go, "Oh no, it's the monster," or "Oh, it's just a just a minion." And to a degree, you could have a token moving towards you that didn't have a number on it, and then you could roll on a table or flip a card or something. But the psychology is different, because that number was always there written on the underside of this physical object. It somehow changes the meaning of that revelation, rather than just going, well, let me draw a card, and wherever I go, that card's always going to be the next one out, or that random number just came out of chance. Like the fact that there is something there is, I think, critical for a hidden movement game. It has to have been there all the time. You have to have been looking at it and going, it's not you, is it? It's not you. And then when it turns out it is you, then it embodies itself in a much more delightful way. So yeah,
yeah,
that's my observation from messing around with Perilous Tales.
the psychological weight of competence within a system, I think, is something you need to be very aware of for that sort of game. And that is a case where it's like it's identical whether you roll on a table or the token was always marked. Apart from competence in the system, you are lacking competence in the system in the second version, and you're not in the first version, and it feels different, and that's
It
very
does feel different, and it's weird because it shouldn't even feel different, because if it was a two-player game, there would be tells and I could be reading the other player, but like there's no tells. It's just a piece of cardboard that's sitting there inertly
Mm.
tricking me with its hiddenness.
No, absolutely. But it's competence with a system is a big psychological driver for people. A weird, really weird one, but a big one. So the next question up is if you could get any IP for a game, what would it be, and what sort of game would you make? And it's interesting because, like, I think
Mad
one of
Max.
hmm?
Mad Max.
Oh, pray tell, what sort of game would you make with that? One of my first answers to that has been one where what I would make from it would be a hidden movement board game, and that would be I mean, a lot of mine would be 2000 AD stuff, but
Mhm.
the top of the tree would be a 2000 AD graphic novel. Well, it was a serialized in the graphic novel, Devlin War Swimming in Blood, which is it's about a set of vampires. Well, a vampire gets arrested and put into a maximum security underwater prison, and vampirism breaks out like a sort of virus. And the top Vatican exorcist, Devlin War, who's like a sort of flamboyantly gay version of Arnold Schwarzenegger, comes in to save everybody. And I'd love to do that. But a bunch of 2000 AD stuff. I'd love to do a game of Nemesis the Warlock, Bad Company, Chopper, any of those. And one,
You really should pitch some of these to Warlord, but you'll have to fight Andy Chambers and Gav Thorpe for them.
I mean, that's the thing, because they've already got like a thing going on, and it's a bit like, I don't think they'd be wildly open to a sort of completely separate thing. I don't know, because it's like the ones I'm interested in are very neat. I don't think Chopper's turning up like in the 2000 AD.
I don't know that one. I'm going to have to look it up.
Yeah, anytime soon. It's a sky surfing series about yeah, you know, a sky surfing super race that happens like once a year, and this
Yeah.
guy who was a graffiti artist in his like first appearances in the comic book ends up becoming a sky surfer, and like has to come into the city each time there's a race because he's always wanted. And it's a very sort of epic long term story. Oh, and like, and I imagine there's lots of people might feel this way. Terry Pratchett, like Discworld, would be such a gift to make him in his gaming, I think.
That's true.
um
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think it'd be really interesting to, because I'd want to make a minis game where violence is possible, but a really bad idea, just like the dumbest thing you could possibly choose. But it is.
Would you set it in the city, or use the fact that it's like you can have adventures outside and you can have sort of urban stuff?
I think the first inclination. I mean, this is partly because my favorite Pratchett books are mostly Sam Vimes books, but I'd be
Mm.
inclined to make it like an urban skirmish game. But like, there have been a couple of books with like full-fledged battlefield. That you could do an in canon rank and flank game for Pratchett, because there's at least two books where armies line up and fight each other. So, but I'd be inclined to do a very sort of very character driven, objective driven, sort of quite weird skirmish game for that sort of thing. How about you? Are there any
Yeah, no,
IP other
I'd
other than the wildly obvious elephant in the room?
well, this is a tricky one for me because I always answer this question for myself, and then I just file the serial numbers off the IP, or I mash it with something else, and it comes out feeling a little bit different. So, like, I really like Eve Online, so I wrote, A Billion Suns. Like, I really like Mad Max, so I wrote Gaslands. Um, right now I'm making a game that's a lot like Doom, and if I had the Doom IP, that'd be amazing. Like, that'd be killer. It would just be the same game but loads better. So I don't know. This one's tricky for me because I never um never feel the restriction. Um so yeah, I think the answer right now is Doom, and what I want to do is I want to solve for a feeling of immense power in a very complicated, dangerous situation where you're performing a ballet with skill, but it still somehow feels like the right balance between uh, a power fantasy and an almost sort of certain teetering on the knife edge kind of uh, risky business. So yeah, that's the one that I really wish I just had the IP for that.
It is an interesting question because it is like there are worlds and IPs where I sort of look at it and I go, well, I sort of want to do that, but like translate it to the tabletop or do something interesting with it or rewrite it. And then, like you say, just file the serial number off and just do it. Who cares? And then there are IPs where you're like, no, what I want is to everyone to know that I was part of the of a world that I love, and for
Mm.
people to go, here's a thing I love extended into a hobby I love, and now everybody can like track back down that line to the other thing that I love and get more of it. And
That's
it's
so
almost
yeah,
like,
that's so interesting because I think that highlights sort of why, like, joking aside, I'm totally uninterested in doing an IP translation. Like when I look at kind of Fantasy Flight sort of style translations, um, I don't want to be part of somebody else's IP. I want to be making my own part of the creative universe. That's even setting aside the like practical considerations that like the last thing in the world I want to do is work with somebody else's IP and get all that kind of additional hassle and overhead and restrictions and yeah, communication sort of cycles and stuff. So it's funny because it's sort of like to a degree, if like to get philosophical past the question, it's like, well, is there a is that what is the true advantage to doing these IPs? Well, it's it's recognition and it's getting the bigger audience and stuff, but at what cost?
yeah, and this is the thing. It's like when you say, well, you should do it and pitch it to Warlord Games, and it's like, well, no, because the truth is, the reason I want to write some of those games is that I want to go back to 13-year-old Glenn and go, look what we did,
Right.
and I
Yeah. Yeah.
know that I know that's not practical. That's not
Yeah.
a practical thing to do. And if I really want to write a game in that world, I would just do it. And then, like you say, I just chip the names off and put it out there. And the truth of the matter is that the wanting to do it is kind of it's one of those sorts of like I don't want to do it, but I want to do it. If it happened and I could also then like you know let myself in the past know, yeah, I would, yeah, that would be lovely, but I'm not actually going to like hunt it down and make it occur.
And at the risk of extending this already extended episode of the podcast, I suppose there's one other thing about the specifically about filing the glib kind of comment comment here about filing the serial numbers off the IP. Like there is for me, there's sort of two ways of approaching that. And I was chatting to someone recently about the other way. So the way that I tend to do is get deeply inspired by something and then build sort of that plus a couple of other things so that I get something that feels like it's coming from my world, but it's got obvious touch points. And Gaslands is one of those. Like it is Mad Max, but it's also Running Man. Like it's a few things stuck together, and that is why it works a bit more as a standalone thing. But like I'm working at the moment. I haven't quite got it to the alpha stage, but I'm working on Junk Space, which is like Gaslands in space, but with starship pilot with like pilots and starfighters. And someone was saying, well, if you want to be successful with that game, you should make it really obvious that it's Star Wars with the numbers filed off, and like make it clear to Star Wars fans that this is for them. It just doesn't say Star Wars on, and that really rang ugly for me. Like that's the kind of filing the serial numbers off that I'm not interested in. I don't want to make a just legally distinct version of something. I
Hmm.
want to find that thing that you're excited about, tap into it, and then like draw the juice over into something else. Because I think that's how a lot of exciting pop IPs are created.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like if I could have a faction in Puke Apocalypse which was the Toxic Avenger,
Hmm.
and particularly the Toxic Avengers, like from the comic book of my childhood, that would make me immensely happy because there's a lot of Toxic Avenger in that game, but it's not like genuinely trying to rip off Tromaville. I would, I would not on any level want to do that, because that's one of the things. It's like, if you love something, you should respect it as well as, So we'll wrap up this conversation, but just for a last one, one of the questions is, what's the last thing you painted? And I don't have the last thing I painted to hand. So if we can answer this question, we'll put photos up over the outro of the last thing we painted. So the last thing I painted is specifically a big wormy monster for a Nurgle feeling referencing army for doing Hobgoblin at demos. And so I did a couple of small units a while ago and chipped them all off of their movement trays, 3D printed movement trays, put them back onto the movement trays, and printed some big monsters to extend it out to bigger armies. So that was the last thing I put a paintbrush to, and I'll take some photos of that and stick them up over this bit. What's the last thing you painted, Mike?
The last thing I painted, I think the last thing I properly painted with a paintbrush was a couple of weeks ago, and I made a video of it, which is these tiny 1/6000 World War II ships that I've been using for Pacific Command. But literally the last thing I put a paintbrush to is this object, which I was painting a couple of days ago, which is a paint funnel on a tube connected to a base that's weighted with a penny. And this is a crud bucket. That's the crud bucket, which is the goal in the middle of my sports game crud bucket, which may have even been released by the time this video goes to print. But it is, yeah, it is a sort of goal in the center of a fantasy sports pitch that is covered, unsurprisingly, in crud.
Lovely. So on that note, I think we'll sign off from this conversation. We'll carry on with these questions on the next one, because we have not got far through the list at all. Again, look, thanks to everybody who have gotten us to 2,000 subscribers. Thanks to everybody who dropped these questions into the Discord. I tell you what, ask more questions below this video, and that way we'll get a jump on when we get to 3,000 subscribers. And whilst you're asking those questions, why not help us get a jump on getting to 3,000 subscribers by liking and subscribing this video, and then swing past from our little link section over to the Discord and join it, so that next time we do this, your questions can be right up front and center of the next video. And follows through some links to some Patreons. There's Mike's Patreon in the links down there. There's my Patreon, which I've added a pay level to, because I'm going to start doing stuff on it for people. And swing by our websites, buy our stuff, follow us on various social medias. But for now, from this episode of Rule of Carnage, it's a big thank you and a big goodbye. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.